He locked himself away for days. Not from war, not from danger, but from reign. In the long history of kings, some were cruel, some were foolish, others were simply mad. But none were like Charles VI of France, a man who feared water more than death itself. He didn't hide from swords or poison, he hid from a splash of water, convinced it could destroy him. Charles truly believed he was made of glass, clear, breakable, and easy to shatter. He stopped bathing. He refused to be touched. He sat for hours, wrapped in blankets, afraid to move. He begged his servants not to come near him, in case their hands broke his crystal skin. Whispers filled the palace halls. Some said he was cursed. Others said the devil had taken his mind. But one thing was clear. France was no longer ruled by a king, but by a fear. And the fear only grew, because Charles was not always like this. He had once been strong and smart, a shining hope for France. At just 20, he pushed out greedy nobles and led with bold ideas. He was brave, young, and beloved by the people. But something inside him broke, and no one could fix it. What followed was not just a sad illness. It was a slow collapse of a king, a court, and an entire kingdom. While Charles sat frozen in fear, France burned with war and betrayal. While he avoided water, his country drowned in chaos. This isn't just the story of madness. It's the story of a throne made of fear, and a ruler who faded like glass. This is the true story of the king who feared water more than death. He never asked to be king. Charles was just 11 years old when the crown of France was placed on his head. His father, Charles V, had ruled with wisdom and strength. He left behind a stable kingdom, one that had survived the Black Death, foreign wars, and internal rebellion. But when Charles V died in 1380, the crown passed to his son, and with it came the weight of a fractured kingdom. Charles VI was too young to rule alone, so France was handed to his uncles, noblemen who called themselves protectors, but acted more like thieves. They drained the royal treasury, raised new taxes, and fought over power like vultures over a fresh kill. The people suffered. The crown dimmed, but when Charles turned 20, everything changed. With quiet determination, he pushed his greedy uncles aside. He brought back his father's trusted advisors, honest men known as the marmozets, and began to rebuild trust. For a brief moment, the young king stood tall. The people began calling him Charles the Beloved. He lowered taxes. He travelled the kingdom. He smiled at children in the streets. France, for the first time in years, felt hopeful. But behind the scenes, the pressure was growing. The 100 Years' War still burned in the background. Nobles whispered in dark corners. The court was full of spies, rivals, and secret alliances. Even Charles's own family carried silent warnings. His mother, Joanna of Bourbon, had struggled with mental instability, and now her son bore the crown with the same blood in his veins. Still, Charles seemed steady. He married Isabeau of Bavaria, a clever young woman from the German states. Together, they presented a shining royal image. But inside Charles, something had started to shift. He would stare too long, speak too softly, grow suddenly silent at feasts. No one said the word madness yet, but the court had seen it before, and they knew what came next. The sun was hot over the forest of Le Mans. Dust rose from the horses' hooves as the royal party rode forward. King Charles VI at the front, wearing his fine armour, his banners fluttering behind him. He looked strong, calm and focused, but inside his mind something was changing. They were on a military journey meant to punish a rebellious noble. Nothing unusual, but along the road Charles had grown quiet. Too quiet. He hadn't spoken in days. His eyes drifted from side to side like he was listening to something no one else could hear. Then it happened. Suddenly, without warning, he drew his sword. He turned on his own men, his own guards, and screamed, "Traitors! Kill the traitors!" His eyes were wild. He swung without aim, without reason. Metal clashed. Horses screamed. Chaos exploded around him. He struck down several of his companions before they could stop him. Finally, a knight rushed forward and knocked him unconscious. The king was carried from the forest in silence. The trees held their secrets. For days he didn't wake. When he finally opened his eyes, he didn't know where he was or who he was. He couldn't speak clearly. He forgot names, faces, even his own wife. And when he returned to Paris, he was no longer the same man. Doctors were called from across Europe. Some said it was melancholy, a deep sadness of the soul. Others blamed overheating from the sun or poisoned water, or even demonic possession. The science of the time was little help. Charles had moments of clarity. He could speak, think, even smile, but the dark fog always came back, worse than before. He would forget he was king, he would forget he was married, he would sit for hours, frozen, unable to move or speak. The court was shaken. Nobles began choosing sides. If the king was broken, who would rule? His wife? His brother? His enemies? The sickness wasn't just in Charles anymore. It had spread to the throne itself. At first, they thought it was just another episode. Another wave of confusion. Another week of strange silences. But this time it didn't pass. Charles began to whisper strange things, that his bones were hollow, that his skin was too thin. He said he was made of glass. Not like glass, made of it. He begged his servants not to touch him, even by accident. He feared a pat on the shoulder could cause his entire body to shatter into pieces. He avoided sudden movements, refused to sit without thick cushions, refused to stand unless metal rods were sewn into his clothes for support. He walked slowly, carefully, like a man balancing on the edge of death. Palace life changed overnight. Doors were padded so they wouldn't slam. Mirrors were removed from the halls. Even laughter was silenced. Anything loud or sharp could upset the king. And water? Water became the enemy. Charles stopped bathing. He said that water weakened his glass body. He believed a splash could crack his chest, that a bath might cause his legs to fall apart. He hid from rain like it was acid. His clothes grew heavy with sweat and dust. Servants had to find ways to clean him without water. Some whispered he smelled of rot, but no one dared say it aloud. Behind the royal curtains, France was being ruled by fear. His wife, Queen Isabeau, tried to hold the court together, but rumours spread fast about her affairs, her hunger for power. Some said she was sleeping with the king's own brother. Others said their children weren't really his. The nobles took sides. Some backed Isabeau, others supported the Duke of Orleans, and in the middle sat Charles, silent, still, and terrified to break. Meetings were held without him. Laws passed without his voice. He was king in name but not in power. Once, Charles burst into a room mid-meeting. He demanded to know who had invited him there. He didn't remember being king. He didn't recognize his advisors. He thought he was a servant. Then he started talking to ghosts, laughing in empty rooms, crying in the middle of the night. They tried to keep it quiet, but the people noticed. No royal speeches, no parades, no justice from the crown, only silence. One day, a visiting noble asked to meet the king. He was led into a dark chamber. There, on the far side, sat Charles, wrapped in thick blankets, eyes wide with fear. He didn't speak. He didn't move. He just stared at the floor, as if waiting for it to crack beneath him. France had a king who believed he was glass, and a kingdom that was starting to believe it too. It was supposed to be a celebration. On a cold January night in 1393, the royal court gathered inside the Hôtel Saint-Paul for a wedding. A lady of Queen Isabeau's household had just married, and the palace glowed with candlelight and music. Servants poured wine, nobles danced. The king, for once, was smiling. It felt like peace, brief, fragile peace. As part of the entertainment, 6 courtiers dressed in wild costumes made of linen soaked in pitch, covered in flax to resemble fur. They were called wood savages, meant to represent untamed men from the forest. Charles VI was among them, laughing behind a mask. The performance began. The wild men danced, howled, and leapt through the hall. Guests clapped. The queen watched from her balcony. Then a torch moved too close. The flames caught instantly. Within seconds, the dancers were on fire, screaming, running in circles, their costumes exploding into burning flesh. The smell of pitch, hair, and skin filled the air. Nobles rushed to help, but it was too late for most. 4 men died in front of the court. 1 man dove into a wine barrel and survived. Charles stood frozen, paralyzed, silent. Only a quick-thinking noble, the Duchess of Berry, had thrown her heavy skirts over him and smothered the flames before they reached his skin. The king was safe, but the damage was done. The people of Paris were horrified. Rumours spread that the fire was a punishment from God for Charles's madness. Others said it was sorcery. The church condemned the event as sinful, dangerous, a sign of royal decay. Charles, already broken, fell deeper into himself. He vanished from public life again. For months, no one saw him. In his absence, power slipped away. Queen Isabeau grew more dominant in court. She held secret meetings, formed her own alliances. At the same time, Charles's brother, Louis of Orleans, began to act more like a king than a prince. commanding armies, spending freely, drawing enemies. One of them was John the Fearless, Duke of Burgundy, who hated Louis and distrusted the Queen. With the king no longer ruling, France turned into a chessboard. Everyone moved their pieces, trying to control the throne without touching the crown. And through it all, Charles sat in the shadows, silent, fragile, afraid. In later years, he would sometimes appear in public, led by servants dressed in heavy robes to hide his trembling. His eyes would dart from side to side, searching for threats only he could see. He often forgot where he was. Once, he asked why the royal palace looked so familiar, forgetting it was his. The monarchy, once feared and respected, became an object of pity. The throne had become a stage. The king, just an actor trapped in the wrong role. France was no longer just broken. It was bleeding. With Charles VI locked inside his mind, power moved without him. The Queen made decisions, the princes made moves, and behind closed doors, alliances turned to betrayals. The strongest conflict rose between two men, Louis of Orléans, the king's own brother, and John the Fearless, Duke of Burgundy. Both claimed to protect the kingdom. Both claimed loyalty to the crown, but neither cared for the glass man who still wore it. In 1407, that tension snapped. One cold night, Louis was returning home through the streets of Paris. Suddenly, a group of men surrounded his carriage. They dragged him from the seat and hacked him to pieces. The streets ran red. The assassins were hired by John the Fearless. And instead of punishment, he was praised. Some even called it a necessary act for France. The kingdom fell into civil war. The Armagnacs, loyal to Orléans, and the Burgundians, loyal to John, tore France apart. Towns burned, families fled, neighbours turned on each other in the name of politics, and all under the name of a king who no longer understood what his crown even meant. In 1420, Queen Isabeau and the Burgundians signed the Treaty of Troyes. It was one of the most shocking betrayals in French history. The treaty named Henry V of England, not Charles's son, as heir to the French throne. In that moment, Charles disinherited his own blood, handing France to the enemy it had fought for nearly 100 years. His son, the Dauphin Charles, was called a bastard, cast out, stripped of his future. And the king, he signed the papers without protest. He barely knew what he was doing. By the time Paris heard the news, the crown of France was already slipping across the channel, and the man who once ruled with promise sat alone in a palace full of shadows, mumbling to himself, watching the rain fall outside. He no longer feared breaking. He already had. Charles VI died on October 21st, 1422, in the Royal Hôtel Saint-Paul, alone and broken. He had ruled France for over 4 decades, but for most of that time he hadn't really ruled at all. He died believing he was made of glass, and in many ways he was. His mind was fragile, his court unstable, his kingdom always on the edge of breaking. They buried him in the royal necropolis of Saint-Denis, beside kings who had conquered, ruled, and died with crowns intact. But Charles was remembered differently, not as Charles the Beloved, as they once called him, but as Charles the Mad. His death did not end the chaos. The war raged on. France remained divided. The treaty that disinherited his son was ignored by those who still believed in blood. Eventually, his son, Charles VII, would fight his way back to the throne, helped by a young peasant girl who claimed to hear the voice of God. Her name was Joan of Arc. She would succeed where armies had failed, but that is another story. Charles VI became a symbol, a warning. His madness was more than illness. It was a reflection of the country itself. When a crown rests on glass, it cannot hold for long. When a king fears water, the kingdom will drown. And perhaps that is the deepest tragedy of all. He was not a tyrant. He was not a villain. He was a boy who tried to be a king and became a ghost instead. History remembers the wars, the treaties, the deaths. But somewhere behind those battles was a man, sitting still, wrapped in silence, begging the world not to touch him. He feared water. He feared movement. He feared being broken. But it was the kingdom that shattered,